The first thing that I noticed was that her voice was shaking. My mom's had 2 kids. She's spoken to women all over the country at conferences and things like that. Her voice very rarely shakes. The second thing that I noticed was that she called me Zach, which I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Nobody calls me Zach in my family. Everybody calls me a variation of Bubba. So if you grow up as kind of a chunky kid in the South, you get a nickname sometimes, and that nickname is Bubba, especially if you're a little brother. And so they call me Bub, Bubby, Bubba, different embarrassing variations of that nickname. Seriously, since that phone call, anytime before or after that, I don't remember the last time that either one of my parents called me by my given name. And so I knew that something was wrong. And so I asked her, Mom, what's going on? And she says, it's Dad. He's been in an accident. And she goes on to tell me that my dad had been driving from Austin to San Antonio on a business trip that morning in the rain. And he was on a highway and, going about 70 miles an hour, and he lost control of the car. And he skid across 3 lanes and hydroplaned into the ditch. His car rolled numerous times until he got stopped by a concrete culvert. And it was we're hearing that. And it was awful. She tells me that he had to be cut out of his car with the jaws of life, and then he was medevaced to the nearest ICU. And she told me that at that point he was alive, but they weren't exactly sure if he would stay that way or what was going to happen. And so I say, okay, all right, let me hang up the phone and get down there. And I remember I hang up the phone, and tears start to stream down my face, and I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I couldn't move. I knew I had to put the car in gear. I had to maybe even just run inside, tell my boss what had happened, put the car in gear, go home, get my wife, and start driving to San Antonio. But I couldn't. I was totally paralyzed by this fear that had overtaken me. I sat in my car with my hands around my steering wheel for almost half an hour because I couldn't move. And I think that fear and worry, they're powerful emotions. I think even at their worst, they can debilitate us. They can cause us to not be able to function with the rest of life, not even be able to move in a situation where you got to drive to San Antonio to see your dad. But they can cripple you. Have you ever experienced worry or fear like this? The kind that seems to take over and permeate every other part of your life. The kind that no matter what else is going right in your life, this is the kind that it makes everything seem like it's wrong. Literally everything else, your job, your family, everything could be going great, but that one thing that you're worried about or that you're fearful of, it affects everything else in life, and nothing seems right as long as that cloud is hanging over you. Maybe for you, you're a worried spouse. You're always overanalyzing everything that your significant other does, right? You see them on their phone, you walk into a room, they put their phone away real fast, and you think, oh my gosh, are they texting somebody else like that they don't want me to know about? And you go and check their phone later, and you get worried all the time, like maybe they don't like me anymore. Maybe I've done something that's offended them. Maybe I've pushed them away. Maybe that's not you. Maybe instead you're a worried parent. You've got a kid who's growing up, and you feel like, I don't know if I'm providing everything that they need. I don't know if I'm setting them up to be successful in life. I don't know how well I'm doing as a parent. And you start living vicariously through your kids and how well they do at school and the grades that they get and how well they do in sports and all of that kind of stuff. And you start to find your identity and worry about your kids constantly. Maybe for you, you're just worried about the world around you. This is kind of a scary time to be alive in a lot of ways. We have a presidential election that's coming up that maybe you're one of these people that if your candidate doesn't win, you are just worried and convinced that the world is going to be over after that. Maybe you're afraid of ISIS or Syrian refugees or the global economy or anything else like that. Maybe everything in your life is fine, but every time you turn on the news, you just get worried. You think about, how's this going to affect me and my family and my loved ones? Or maybe you're worried about what people think about you. And I'll be honest with you, this is me. Literally, as I stand up here before you today, talking to you about worrying about what other people think, I am worrying about what you think as I'm talking about that. Maybe that's you. Maybe the way that you dress, the clothes that you wear, the car that you drive, the house that you have, the amount of money that you spend, the trips that you take, all of that kind of stuff. You're always just worried about what people think, how many likes you're going to get on your Facebook picture or your Instagram photo. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're just constantly worried about what other people think. The good thing is that Jesus spent quite a bit of his time here on earth talking about worry and fear and the power of these emotions. And one of the best examples happens in Luke 12, starting in verse 22. So if you have your Bibles or your phones, you can turn them on and turn there with me, and the verses will also be on the screen behind me. Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 22. Verse 22 says, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear.'" So Jesus is very clearly saying here, do not worry. Don't worry about what you'll eat, about your body, about what you'll wear, about your life at all. Don't worry. And the word translated worry here is the same word that is used to describe what happens when a ship out on the ocean is caught in a storm. It's the same word for worry. And when I hear that, I think about, have you ever seen that movie, The Perfect Storm? George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, right? If you've never seen it, picture this boat, this kind of small fishing boat that goes out in the middle of the ocean, and this huge storm starts to rage around it. And the ship's being tossed back and forth with every wave that's going up and going down. It's riding those. And no matter what George Clooney or Mark Wahlberg or any of the other crew members do, they can't control the boat from the inside. The boat's completely controlled by the storm around it. That's what happens to us when we worry. Think about it. We can no longer control our lives from the inside. We're being controlled by the circumstances, whatever it is we're worrying about from the outside. Our mood, our emotions, our lifestyle, our choices all become controlled by the circumstances around us. So knowing that this is what worry does to us, Jesus says, do not worry. But he knows this is much easier said than done. So he ends up giving us 3 reasons not to worry. He gives us 3 reasons not to worry. The first one is that there is more to life than worry. Look at verse 23. "For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds?" Worry, I don't know if you've experienced this, but worry is not an emotion that is relegated to a couple of different circumstances. It's not something that's bound by a few types of situations. It's something that can permeate every part of your life. Like we talked about, everything else might be going well, but if you're worried about something or you're fearful of something, it begins to permeate and affect every other part of your life. In this passage, the disciples were worrying about how they didn't have enough. They didn't have enough money, they didn't have enough to eat. And really, actually, in the chapter before this, Jesus just finished telling a story about a rich man who was worried because he had too much. Disciples were worried because they didn't have enough. The rich man was worried because he had too enough. He had too much. He couldn't build enough barns to hold all of the things that he had. He was worried that he was going to lose his possessions. If you're dating someone, I bet you worry about what would happen if you ended up getting married to that person. How's that going to go? What's the wedding going to be like? Am I going to be happy ever after? But I bet at the very same time, you worry about what will happen if you don't marry that person or if you don't ever marry anyone. It doesn't matter the situation. We can worry about both sides. If you're a student, I bet that you worry about what will happen when you graduate. What kind of job am I going to get? What's life going to look like? But I bet you also worry about what happens if you don't graduate. It's easy to get caught up in worrying no matter the situation. And Jesus gives us this example of ravens. And ravens are a bird like so many others that don't store up a bunch of food so that it can go back to the nest and eat whenever it's hungry. The raven just lives life, and when it gets hungry, it eats. And all the raven knows is that every time in its life that it's been hungry, it's found food. That's its main experience. Every time the raven's been hungry, God has provided it food. Jesus tells us not to worry because there's more to life than the things that we're worried about. Jesus knows that any given situation can lend itself to worry no matter what side of it you are on. And he also knows that life is bigger than any of those situations. So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that worry doesn't change our situation. Look at verse 25. "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Now, most of us probably know this already, but Jesus is saying that worry does nothing positive in our lives. Things don't change just because of the amount of time we spend worrying about them. Your presidential candidate that you're going to vote for is not going to get elected based on the amount of time that you spend worrying about him or her getting elected. It doesn't work like that. You aren't going to start making more money at work because you spent so much time worrying about how much money you're going to make at work. Your life isn't going to get any better, and it's not going to last any longer because of worry. In fact, research done by a group at Harvard Medical School suggests that worry actually accelerates your lifespan, the aging process. This same research concluded that prolonged chronic worrying can take up to 6 years off your life. Jesus says you can't even add an hour to your life by worrying. Not only is that true, you can't add an hour, but you can take up to 6 years off of it by worrying. So Jesus says, don't worry, because it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change your circumstances. But the last reason that Jesus gives us not to worry, I believe, is the most important. The last reason is that God's love is bigger than our worry. God's love is bigger than our worry. Look at verse 27. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? God gives flowers and ravens and everything else, everything that they need. How much more will he give to us who are his children, who he loves? How much more will he take care of us? One of my favorite stories in the Bible is found in Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, and it talks about this very topic. It's a story about Jesus and the disciples. It says, that day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side of the lake. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. I love this story. The wind and the waves are raging around the disciples' boat. They think that they're about to drown. And where's Jesus? He's sleeping on a cushion in the stern. You think Jesus was worried about drowning? Oh, he's napping. He's doing great. Just being rocked to sleep by the waves, you know? So they go down there and they're like, Jesus, what's going on? Aren't you even worried about us? Do you think we're about to die? What's going to happen? And he said, no, I'm not worried. When we feel like the boat is being tossed around and we feel like the waves of worry are carrying us whatever way that they go, Jesus calms our greatest fears with a simple phrase, quiet, be still. He gets up, he rebukes the wind and the waves, and he rebukes the worry and the fear in our lives by saying, quiet, be still. Because in the quietness and the stillness, the only thing that remains is his love. The only thing that we can hear and feel and think about in the quietness and the stillness of life is his love. And therein lies the secret to a life without worry. Because here's the thing. We can have all the reasons in the world not to worry. We can even listen to Jesus about the 3 reasons that we shouldn't worry. But the only way that we can truly stop living under the shadow of fear is if we replace it with something. Because like we said earlier, it doesn't matter how well everything else in life is going. You might be worried about your spouse, but everything else, your job, your kids, your family, your relationships, your social life, you're killing it. But you're worried about your spouse, and that casts this fear, this anxiety, this worry over every other part of life. You might have all the reason in the world not to worry, but if it's still inside you, it's going to affect you. It's going to permeate every part of your life. It has to be replaced with something. Thankfully, Jesus gave us this promise in 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about this idea of why did Jesus come to earth? He left heaven, he came to earth. Why did he come? There's the answer right there. Jesus came to replace fear with love. He came to replace fear with love. The next time you find yourself being overcome with worry or being tossed around by fear, I want to encourage you to sit down, to pray and ask Jesus to quiet and still the storm around you. And I want you to just meditate on the promise of 1 John 4:18. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. If you need to repeat it to yourself over and over and over again, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. Because Jesus left heaven and he came to earth to replace fear with love. And if you'll allow him to, he'll do that in your life. All you got to do is ask him. Back in 2012, after I was finally able to put the car in gear and go get my wife, we got to San Antonio late that night. I remember walking into my dad's ICU room, and I see him laying there, and it was still to this day, it was just one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. And I remember feeling completely just powerless over it. He's hooked up to all these machines. There's doctors in and out. And I just remember thinking, there's nothing I can do. No amount of worry, no amount of stress or hard work or anything is going to save his life. He was in the hands of God and the doctors at that point. There's nothing I could do. And for the next 7 days or so, we sat with my dad in the ICU, and slowly but surely he got better. But during that week, I experienced a peace about what had happened more than I'd ever experienced it before. God taught me that no matter the storm, no matter the outcome, trusting in his love is so much better than being tossed around by the storms of life. Trusting in Jesus' love is so much better than being tossed around by the storms of life. So, what would life look like if we really allowed Jesus' love to replace our fear? Look back at Luke 12, verses 31 and 32. It says, "But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." So Jesus here is saying that if we just seek God's kingdom, all the stuff that we're worried about, it's going to take care of itself. It's going to be replaced with love. But I love the dichotomy, if you noticed it, in these two verses, right back to back. It says, seek the kingdom, but then in the very next breath, he says, do not be afraid. Your Father has given you the kingdom. He says, seek the kingdom, but don't be afraid. Your Father has given you the kingdom. It's like Jesus was telling his disciples to seek the kingdom, but then realizing that they might not know how to do that, or they might be overwhelmed by the task of doing that. He says, no, don't worry. He's already given you the kingdom. Seeking it just means embracing it. It's already there. It's right in front of you. Don't be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Here's what that means for us. We don't have to be afraid because he has already replaced our fear with love. It's already happened. It happened on the cross. Jesus left heaven, came to earth, lived a perfect life, went to the cross, took all of our sin, all of our struggles, all of our fears and anxieties and worries and storms, and took them on himself, and he took it to the cross, and he died. And he took all of those things away. So the question for me then is, and I'd be asking if I was sitting in your seat, why do we still experience all this stuff? If it really was taken away by the cross, nailed to it, Jesus died, he was buried, he rose, he took care of all of it, why do we still experience those things? And I can just speak for myself. I think I experience them because I forget. I don't think I'm a bad guy most of the time. I don't think I'm unfaithful. I think I'm just forgetful. I forget that his love has replaced my fear. And like running back to an old habit or an old struggle or an old addiction, I run back to the old fear because it's comfortable. It's what I know. Even though it's horrible, even though it doesn't lead me anywhere, when I sit in that worry, I feel some semblance of being able to control my life. but it's just not true. It's fake. The only way that you can get rid of the fear in your life is to remember what Jesus has done for you. Step back into that love and say, God, tell my life to quiet down and be still. Because I can't do it on my own. You have to do it. Ask him to replace your fear with love. That's the secret. If you're sitting here this morning and you've never experienced that before, maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're not a Christian. You've never experienced that before. You've never even said yes to Jesus. You don't even know what it means to say yes to Jesus. Man, I'd love to talk to you about that. Just come find me afterwards. Let's talk about that because I promise you it's life-changing. And if you're sitting here this morning, you've already said yes to Jesus. You have the kingdom. It's been given to you. He says, seek the kingdom. But the next breath, he says, your Father's already given it to you. He's already replaced your fear with love. He's given you unlimited access to his never-ending, always flowing fountain of hope and grace and love. The only time that we're not experiencing it is when we step out of the fountain. The fountain's there. It's running. It's flowing all the time. Just step back into it. God, replace my fear with love. I can't do it. You have to do it. So here's the truth. It's not about overcoming worry or fear. It's about realizing that it's already been overcome. You can't do it. I can't do it. We can't overcome worry, fear, anxiety, storms. But what we can do is realize that it's already been overcome. Remember that and step back into that. He replaced all your fears with his great love. All you have to do is realize he's offering it to you as a free gift, no strings attached. You just have to say yes. So let me pray. God, thank you for your love for us. God, thank you that it's never ending. God, thank you that no matter who we are or what we've done, we are welcome in your kingdom, and that your kingdom is not some far off thing, something that we have to earn or stress about or worry for. Your kingdom has been given to us. It's in our midst. Literally, your word says that it is in us. You've placed your kingdom, your great love inside of us. God, what an amazing truth. Every time that I forget that, every time that we forget that, God, draw us back to the truth in 1 John 4:18, that there is no fear in love, but that perfect love, and the only perfect love that there is yours. Perfect love drives out fear. God, quiet the storms, still the waves in our lives. Draw us back to your great love. God, and compel us as we leave this place, not just to remember that that love is for ourselves and that's where we should remain. God, but help us to show that great love to everybody that we encounter with grace and with joy. God, your word says that we love because you first loved us. Help that to be our rallying cry as we leave this place and go out into the world this week. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.